everyone. Welcome back for another episode of The Loyal Lawyer, where we are going to be continuing our series, Accident Claim Central. And today, we are going to be discussing a pretty tough topic.
It is tough.
But it's a topic that needs to be discussed, and we are going to be talking about wrongful death. And before we go any further, we do not want to just not acknowledge a lot of events that have happened in the past week. So we are going to take some time just to discuss those and give our condolences to the friends and family of the victims within the past week.
Yes.
I'll let you kind of take over on that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've had the school shooting. I think it was at Evergreen. And then
yep.
the Ukrainian young lady that was on the bus that was attacked, Irina Zaruski. Lizzie Zaruska.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the murder of Charlie Kirk.
Yeah.
So, anytime there's violence, it's incredibly sad. And, of course, violence that ends in death is taking people from their family and from their friends. Mm-hmm. And it's just so sad. We certainly give our condolences to the families. Mm-hmm. Violence is never an answer. There's always room for people to discuss their differences and debate those differences. And just realize we're all humans, and we're all made in the image of God, and no one deserves to die for what they think, and no one, should be the victim of violent attacks like those three. So we just, we certainly pray for everybody, and are just so saddened by that, and just pray for a world where there won't be all of that violence. I know that there's always violence and always risk, but it really is upsetting and just breaks everyone's hearts when people are taken from, their life's taken for no good reason at all.
Yeah, exactly. We've made it pretty clear on this podcast, but we are very strong Christians, and we believe deeply and love Jesus deeply. And with all these tragedies, we're very grateful for the Jesus that we serve, and that these people will be reunited one day with their loved ones, even though their lives had such a tragic ending.
That is so true. And that does give, that's how people who have their faith can get through times like this.
Yep,
If you don't have that faith, then, you don't have the hope of that eventual reunion with your loved ones. And that's, there are a lot of family members, now that I'm 57, I've got a lot of family that, my dad's passed and my grandparents have passed. And so I look forward to that day when we all get to be in heaven and have that reunion. But I just hope people who don't have their faith will find it.
Exactly. Exactly. And as I said before, today we are going to be talking about wrongful death cases. And this is something that everyone needs to be aware of. But we did not want to just stay silent on the events that have happened in the past week.
Right.
We wanted to fully acknowledge them, fully give our condolences to all of the victims and their families and their loved ones.
Absolutely.
Before moving on, because that is most important to us. So, now for Accident Claim Central.
Yes. So wrongful death is something that occurs sometimes from car accidents or truck accidents. There can be wrongful deaths from even slip and fall accidents where someone may fall and hit their head and have a brain bleed that they just aren't able to save them. There are even dog attacks that can sometimes end in a death. So a personal injury case is when you can recover for your injuries and your pain and suffering, your medical expenses, lost wages, due to the negligence that someone else caused the accident.
Okay.
Well, under that same situation, if the injuries are so severe that there's a death, then that claim becomes a wrongful death. So it's still a recovery for your pain and suffering up to your death, for your medical expenses, for your lost income, as could be projected out into the future based on your education and career path that you already are on.
Okay.
So wrongful death is a personal injury case that goes really badly because the injuries turn into a death.
Yes, and it's a death that should have been prevented, but because of someone's or something's
negligence. Someone did something negligent that caused an accident.
Yes.
And if that accident turns into a death, then it's a wrongful death. It could also be a medical malpractice case, a nursing home abuse case. I mean, any time where death is the result of negligence any of those things falls into that wrongful death category.
Okay, now tell us, what is the most shocking thing people don't know about wrongful death claims in Georgia?
I guess that is probably that you can recover for the total value of the life. And it's the total value of the life is not only the economic loss that we talked about, how that person was, whatever their career path was or their education levels, what they would have earned if they'd not been killed. It's also from the eyes of that deceased party, what was life worth to them? How involved were they with their family? How much love was there with their spouse and their kids?
Right.
And how active were they in the community? And, were they, it kind of brings tears to your eyes if you think about you're looking at the value of the life from the eyes of the person who wrongfully was killed.
Right.
So that's a difficult thing.
Yeah.
But that means that there's going to be a lot of witnesses, that would be very close to that person.
Yes.
The spouse, the children, the friends, people at church, people at work, people at, all the things in life that they were active in and enjoyed, to describe how full and how incredibly vibrant and full of joy their life was before that accident or negligent act that took their life.
Okay, now I know that Georgia has a very specific hierarchy. Can you walk us through the hierarchy of who has the, what's the word for it? Who has the right to, or the priority of filing a wrongful death?
Absolutely. So in a wrongful death action in Georgia, the surviving spouse is going to be the one who has the sole responsibility and ability to bring a wrongful death.
So they're first.
They're first. And if there's no surviving spouse, then the children would be next in line.
Okay.
And if there's no surviving spouse and no children, then the parents of the party that was deceased would be the ones that could bring it. Now, that's the action from the family. There's also an action from the estate. And the estate, anytime you die, you have an estate where they take all the assets and the money and the properties, and they have to settle up with paying the debts, and then they distribute by a will or by the intestate laws, which are just the laws that allow you to figure out how that money is going to be distributed to the beneficiaries of that deceased.
Right. Okay, very interesting. Does the closeness of someone's relationship with the person have anything to do with it, or is that disregarded?
It's disregarded. You basically, this is going to be based on how closely related you are.
By genetics and stuff.
Well, by marriage or
marriage, yes, so, that's first.
That's why the spouse is the one that has the most, the most closely related, and they're the ones who control whether that lawsuit's filed and those kinds of things. Then the children, then the parents, because the spouse is the closest, the children are next, and then the parents are, even though they're very, very close, a lot of times at that, when you're an adult, they're still a big part of your life, but they're not in your immediate family when you've already created another family with spouses and children.
But say it's a child, then the parents would come first, I'd assume?
If it's a child, then it would be, there's no spouse, and there probably wouldn't be any kids, so it would be the parents. Yeah.
Okay, very interesting. What is the biggest mistake families make right after losing a loved one in preventable claims?
Well, I think a lot of it is that people are just so brokenhearted and so grieving to the level that it's hard for them to even think about making big decisions.
Things, right.
So you may delay too long hiring an attorney. Hiring an attorney is going to have someone going to work. When we immediately are going to start investigating the accident. We're going to try to, if it's a car accident, then we're going to be getting witness statements. We're going to be having pictures of the accident scene. We're going to have pictures of the vehicles. If it's slip and fall or any of those kinds of personal injury claims, that investigation right at the beginning, and also, you can send out letters of spoliation, which means that you can tell stores that may have surveillance cameras or, with the Ring camera and all that, you can send out letters to request and to require that they preserve those videos.
Right.
So those videos can tell you a lot of, when there's two arguments of who was at fault, you can solve it quite easily when you see it on a video.
Right. I think the biggest thing I just learned just from you saying that is that people think bringing a lawyer in is going to complicate things, and it's going to make them put a lot more effort forth, that they may be too heartbroken to bring forth to the table. But really, it's simplifying things and kind of giving the lawyer the responsibility and taking it off of their plate.
Correct. That's a great way of putting it. That's what I was going to say as well. You know, there's no need for you to try to wing it and figure out all those complex things and investigating and collecting evidence. And, you know, if it's a medical malpractice, you need to be getting the medical records. You need to be getting an expert to review them. There's things that need to be done, and you just take that off your plate.
Exactly.
You know, when you hire a seasoned attorney, they're going to be extremely skilled, and you know they're going to put 110% of their effort into making sure that claim is moving down the claims process in an appropriate manner.
Exactly.
And if you don't hire an attorney and you wait, then those things may be gone. You may not be able to get the evidence you need.
Right.
And you know it's going to be, you're still going to have to deal with it later. It's what you said is exactly right. You know, take it off your plate and
give it to a
professional and let them take it and run with it for you.
Same brainwave.
Yeah.
Okay, now tell me this. Based on your experience dealing with these cases, have you ever seen families file over who gets to fight
over the
wrongful death claim?
Well, certainly, yes. I mean, when you have certain, you know, priorities of who can do it first. I mean, usually there's not going to be a problem if there's a spouse, because the spouse has got the sole, you know, right to file it.
Exactly.
If there's no surviving spouse, then the children have equal rights.
So how do you choose between children?
Well, they need to have an attorney or attorneys file it where they're all a part of it.
Okay, so for me and my sisters, all four of us would be a part of the same claim.
Yes.
Okay.
And, you know, I had a case that was a wrongful death case that, you know, the person called me and the death had already occurred. There had already been a settlement, but one of the children had gotten an attorney and gotten it settled and was buying cars and buying houses and, you know, wasn't sharing any of the proceeds with the other people in her household, the other siblings that had every right to an equal share of that recovery. So that turned into a lawsuit against the sibling that was taking all the money and the attorney that wasn't looking after the interests of all the people at that same level. And that lawsuit did turn into a situation where the client that was being left out did get their share, but it took litigation to get it. Okay,
and say, like, if someone passes away, they have a will or an estate, and everything's written on how they want it divided.
Yes.
And it's not equal between the kids. Would they follow exactly what it says?
So those are two different issues, of course. You've got the wrongful death. Everyone has this, at that level, all the children, for example, would have the same right to the same level of...
Oh, that would be a settlement. That's not anything to do with their assets.
Right. So then when you're dealing with the other assets, when you're dealing with the other assets, that goes through the will and, you know, who gets what, and that can be any way the person who wrote the will wants it to be. It could be 90% for one child and 10% for the child that, you know, left home and never called you again.
Yes.
So you get to control exactly the way your assets are distributed in your will.
Okay.
And that's why it is important. You know, I know it's a similar topic, but having a will, it's inexpensive to do, and it's very important to do, and it's going to make it where your estate can be probated. You know, your estate can be distributed, approved by the court, and distributed quickly and inexpensively.
Yes.
You know, you don't want to create a scenario where there's uncertainty and it's going to require litigation to sort out this, and then, you know, heirs that are, you know, brothers and sisters, and, you know, they're all fighting over money, and, you know, you just want that will to be very, very clear, and you want to have a will.
Exactly.
And then, you know, with this situation, you know, it's really important that, you know, that everyone's on the same page, and that everyone's interests are being protected, and that it's fair, and then that there's ultimately the recovery for the wrongful death is going to be full compensation for the loss of that death, that person. And of course the estate's claim, I think we talked about that a little bit, you know, it's not for the value of the life, it is for the medical bills and the burial expenses and the things that would need to be paid for out of the estate. You know, so the estate is, you know, have all these assets and you got to pay, you know, the obligations or the debts. Well, if you have medical expenses because they were rushed to the hospital and they tried to save them and they did emergency surgery and there's $100,000 in medical bills, and then the burial expenses and all those things that happen because of the wrongful death, the estate can sue to get those bills, get a recovery for those.
Okay, so if y'all couldn't already tell, I am learning alongside all of you. I'm sitting here just soaking it up like a sponge. Okay, perfect. And then what happens when parents and the surviving spouse disagree on how to handle the case? Let me try and answer that. Wouldn't it be the spouse?
The spouse is going to have the most say.
Yes. Okay.
And then they're all going to have a share in the recovery.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And then I think I know the answer to this.
Yeah.
But this also goes in with the level of closeness to the person. Mm-hmm. So say someone's parents aren't necessarily in their life.
Yes.
But so someone isn't married, their parents aren't in their life, and there's a girlfriend or a boyfriend. Okay. Would the parents still
let's simplify that a little bit. Let's just say that there is no surviving spouse.
No surviving spouse.
And the person has a girlfriend that they live with.
Yes.
That they're very close to, but they aren't married.
Yes.
And they're surviving kids. At that point they're probably adult kids. Who has the right to recover? Well, nowhere in that list where we said it's the spouse first and then the children and then the parent of the deceased person.
Yes.
There isn't a girlfriend or a best friend or those are things that the law's not going to recognize. They're going to recognize marriage and they're going to recognize relationship based on blood.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Got it. Yeah. We made it easy.
Good question.
Thank you. Now, I know in Georgia we use the two-claim system.
Yes.
Can you define what the two-claim system is? Because before this podcast, I had no idea.
And we've kind of talked about it. I mean, you've got the spouse that can bring the wrongful death. You've got the children if the spouse is not, if there's no surviving spouse, the children. You got the parents. That's all the claim for wrongful death.
Yes.
For family.
Yes.
And that's going to be for the full value of the life. That can be for your medical expenses up to, that before you died, where they tried to save you, the pain that you experienced up until the time where you passed. It's also the loss of future income. So let's say that the person was in law school and they hadn't graduated yet, and they don't have a track record of being a lawyer, but we know that they had excellent grades and that they already had internships, and it looked like there was lots of beautiful success in the horizon. Economists can project out what that person would have likely made if they had not died.
Okay.
So economists are used as the experts to help kind of recover for and project out that future income that was lost.
Okay.
Then, of course, there aren't medical expenses in the future because they passed, but there's medical expenses in the past. And then, there's the pain and suffering that they experienced before they died. And then the big one's the value of the life. And so the value of the life is not only the economic losses, which would be loss of income, but it would also be the non-economic losses, which are the loss of a spouse, the loss of the the loss of the spouse. When that person died, if they had a wife or a husband, then there's a value there that you get to recover for the value of the life, and for as a part of that is the loss to all of the friends and family and society as a whole if they're a great person.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And can the same lawyer handle both claims?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, everybody's going to be there's not going to be any conflict there because everything's still going to follow the way that it's being distributed is going to be based on spouse first, then children, then parents. And then the estate is going to be recovering for those losses that should have never occurred because of the medical expenses, burial expenses. And then any other assets would be distributed based on a will if there is one. And if there's not a will, then there's a set of laws that control. Each state has laws that say, okay, if someone dies without a will, then we've got a set of rules that we have to apply. But those are often, it's often more expensive to probate an estate when there's not a will. And then sometimes it doesn't end up with a distribution that would have been what the person would have wanted. Because people tend to, when they write a will, they want to be as fair as they can. And of course, if being fair may mean that people who took care of you in your elderly years and who were always supporting you, you may want them to get more than someone who's a child that really didn't have much to do with you. So a will lets the person decide ahead of time exactly how it's going to be distributed, and then as long as the will is valid, then there's no litigation.
Okay, perfect. And then how do you put a dollar value on someone's life in Georgia?
Yeah, that's
a
where
tough question.
It is tough, and I think it requires a lot of witnesses. You'd call them before and after witnesses if it wasn't wrongful death. Maybe it's still before and after, but I guess it's just before. Because there's nothing after.
Yeah.
So, but you have witnesses that are spouses and children and parents and friends and coworkers and church members that are anyone and everyone that can explain how that life was something that was being well lived. That's a life that person, it's from the eyes of the person who was killed. So were they enjoying life to the fullest, and did they have deep relationships with people at homework and play? It's a difficult thing, but certainly life has a huge value, and when a life is taken, it does create a hole that is hard to fill, and certainly money doesn't fill it. But it is the way that the surviving family can try to put the pieces back together and at least be able to continue to pay the bills and continue their life journey that person would have wanted them to continue. When anytime you have a spouse and children, you want the best for them. And so, that's why you have a will, because you want to, and that's why you have life insurance, and that's why you work hard to acquire assets, so that, one day you hope that, when you're no longer here to provide and protect, that there'll be finances there that can help.
Exactly.
So that's the process. It's a tragedy. It's
awful.
Broken hearts are always a part of it. And certainly, it is very difficult to put a money value on any life, but it is ultimately a jury that would decide.
Okay.
And so it's interesting. I was talking to an attorney, and he does a lot of wrongful death, and he has lots of $1 million verdicts and multi-million-dollar verdicts, and he was saying that it changes in time. The value of the life, it used to be in the 1990s, to 2000. That maybe about 500,000 was kind of the average, which seems really low when you think about a life. And then in the early 2000s, it probably felt like it was more of $1 million. Now, of course, the jury decides, and these are just kind of broad strokes of what's generally happening. But now, the value of a life tends to be a lot more.
Wow.
The recoveries are in the millions, depending on the facts and what have you. And so that does create a problem if there's not enough insurance. And so a lot of times people are in a car accident, for example, they can be driving around with $25,000 worth of coverage. That hasn't changed in 30 years. My whole career, $25,000 is the minimum that you can drive around with. Well, $25,000 for wrongful death, that's horrible, of course. So really, the only way you can fully protect yourself from that kind of situation in a personal injury claim would be to have uninsured, underinsured motorist coverage, which is you can add to your auto policy. And then, in addition to what you can recover from the negligent party, you have that second policy. And then sometimes people have umbrella policies, which are yet another level of protection where you can have uninsured motorists, underinsured motorists. So, buy as much of that type of insurance as you can afford, because it's the only thing that'll save you if you have a situation where you have huge medical expenses and a horribly, catastrophically injured victim, or if you have, the worst tragedy of all of a victim that passes away.
Now, what's the difference between economic and non-economic damages?
So economic is going to be the medical expenses.
Okay.
It's going to be the hard numbers. The lost income is going to be that. Okay. Economic is going to be, things that you can get a bill for or project out the lost income that would have been lost as a result of the death. If they had not died, they would have worked for 40 years and made, hundreds of thousands of dollars or maybe millions of dollars. Non-economic are the pain and suffering, the loss of enjoyment of life if there's a period of time before the death. And then there's also, of course, that's the value of that life from the eyes of the person who died.
Yes. Okay, now tell me this. So, say a wrongful death happens, the family's too heartbroken to even consider legal matters. What evidence disappears during that waiting period before they file? Is it a lawsuit?
Well, anything is a
case?
claim.
A
So
claim.
you have a claim,
Claim.
and so a claim is always you're going to be setting it up with the insurance companies that are going to cover the claim. And evidence can certainly disappear. It depends a lot on what caused the death.
Okay.
So if it's a car accident, then those there may be videos. There could be photos of the property damage. It could be photos of the injuries. It could be photos of the cars at the scene. Showing the position. It could be dash cam videos. It could be a lot of things that are evidence.
Could it even be a witness's memory?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Or even the witness contact information. So they may remember it, but you can't ever find them again. Maybe they didn't stick around, but if you investigated early, or maybe they are on the police report, but you just can't find them again because maybe they get sick or pass away or move away or what have you.
Tell me this, is there a time period, like a certain time period, where if it's after that time period, a witness is no longer trusted, if that makes sense? No? Okay.
No.
You just have to
Every
prove
witness
that they
is
were
gonna-
there. And
Every witness is going to, certainly be cross-examined on how'd you see it, what'd you see, how do you know this, that kind of thing.
Okay.
But then there's always the 2-year statute of limitations for any kind of personal injury or medical malpractice, product liability. Those are all have a 2-year statute from the date of the negligent act.
Okay.
So whether it's a car wreck or whether it's a surgery that went so badly that the person didn't survive, you have to have the underlying negligent part of the case. I mean, you don't get to recover because the surgery goes bad. You get to recover because the surgery goes bad and the surgeon messed up, made a mistake, did something that falls below the medical standard of care. Is kind of the legal language for it. But basically, other doctors, if they came along in a medical malpractice situation and said, I can't believe you did A, B, and C. You should have done something totally different, or I never would have done what you did. Sometimes there's drug interactions that you should never prescribe certain things, and they do. They too much, or the wrong medication, or just doing the surgery without following all the protocols of safety for surgical procedures. Sometimes there's certain things that you should always do. And if they don't follow that protocol, and because of that, it's deemed to be a medical negligent act, then that's when you'd have the recovery.
Do you bring in other doctors to come in, say, in court, and say, I would never do this?
In fact, when you file the lawsuit in medical malpractice, you have to have an affidavit from a doctor that says that this is what they did and this falls below the standard of care.
Okay.
So you're right. You can file the lawsuit without the affidavit, but the affidavit has to be filed timely, and it has to state that medical negligence occurred, or else the lawsuit would get dismissed.
Okay, perfect. And how often do you run into insufficient insurance coverage in wrongful death cases? Does that, in your experience?
Almost every case.
time?
Yeah. That's why getting that uninsured motorist coverage is so important. But that only covers you for car accidents and motorcycle accidents and pedestrian accidents. It's not going to cover you for medical malpractice. Now, the good news is medical malpractice, usually there's pretty big policies for medical procedures. And then, of course, if there's a 18-wheeler involved, commercial vehicles, there's much bigger policy limits for that. The biggest risk is probably that you're going to get hit by someone who doesn't have, it's not a commercial vehicle, it's someone who doesn't have a lot of assets and they can barely pay their insurance, so they get that bare minimum policy.
Right.
And they're kind of judgment proof. If they don't have anything, you're not going to be able to garnish wages if they don't have jobs that pay well, and you're not going to be able to levy property that they don't own, or that they have mortgages on or liens on and that kind of thing.
Okay.
So that is often, a second tragedy that arises from a wrongful death, is that you don't have sufficient funds. And that happens in a lot of, I would say probably once a week or once every 2 weeks, I have the conversation. It's not usually a wrongful death, but it's usually one where you're like, wow, your medical bills are $68,000 and there's a $25,000 policy for the negligent driver, and there's a $25,000 policy on the uninsured motorist. So you got 50, and you got medical more than that. So that's where you really have to work hard to try to negotiate reductions with the medical bills to try to get those paid and try to get as much of that money as you can to the injured party.
Okay.
But it's challenging. It's obviously I'd a lot rather have cases with huge limits where that's not going to be that terrible bad news. And let me tell you, this is it's great when there's nothing that limits your recovery other than just the value of the case. Proving the value of the case, we're going to do that very, very well.
Yeah.
But it's kind of the luck of the draw regarding, when a client comes in, you're like, okay, what insurance did the negligent driver have? What insurance do you have? What insurance was on the car that you happened to be in when the accident happened? And do you have any family members that live with you, called resident relatives, that have a separate policy? So we're looking for levels. And, I had a motorcycle accident case where I was able to stack 5 policies, and we recovered $500,000. But that required, the insurance from the negligent driver, the personal insurance, the family member insurance that people that lived with him. I think the car was his, so it didn't involve that. But those are the different, stacking those limits and having an attorney that's experienced in that is going to make all the difference.
All the difference.
In fact, if you mess that up and you don't, have the right limited liability release, and so you can settle with the liability carrier and then preserve the others and then know what order and, give the proper notice so that you don't lose the coverage, and then collect from each one in the priority list that they have under Georgia law. It's, inexperienced attorneys might make mistakes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So now tell me this, what's the first step families should take if one of their family members is someone that they lose to a preventable death?
So it depends on the type of claim.
Okay.
We'll start with the car accident. If it's a car accident, then calling an attorney in any instance is always going to be extremely helpful. The sooner you get a professional injury and wrongful death attorney involved, that's going to mean that there's someone who knows what to do, and there's someone who can start gathering the evidence that's needed to prove the case. If there's negligence in any situation that leads to a death or a serious injury, you got to prove that. So, the injury attorneys and wrongful death attorneys know how to do that, and we'll start gathering that information. So that's probably the number one thing. You've got a lot on your plate, like we talked about. Just give this to a professional. Take it off. You can deal with your grief and deal with, in this situation, funeral arrangements and that kind of thing. But at least there's someone preserving the evidence, investigating it. In a medical malpractice, a lot of times what you're looking at is gathering those medical records as quickly as possible. And, the sooner you get them, you don't like to think that medical records could be altered. But, once you're further down the pipe, once there's obviously a claim, I just feel much better about getting the records right from the beginning as soon as possible, long before a claim is even being kind of explored.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah.
Well, do you think we've covered everything?
I think we did great. A tough topic.
Tough topic. And to talk about.
It's heartbreaking, and wrongful death is something where when you're dealing with the family members, it's just so hard. The only thing that is probably equally hard is I remember a time when I had someone who was paralyzed, and he was 16 years old, 17 years old, and I was in the Shepherd Spine Center in the the hospital room, and I'm there with him as the doctors are saying you're never going to walk again, and the mom and the dad are crying. So injuries, serious injuries, especially catastrophic ones, and then the loss of a loved one, doesn't get any harder than that. And money doesn't replace any of that, but it certainly is needed to help you put the pieces back together. If you have a catastrophic injury, you're going to need that money sometimes for home care and, modifying your house where it's handicap accessible and that kind of thing. And if it's the wrongful death situation, then capturing, paying all those expenses and also getting money that would have been earned for the family from that wrongful death action is needed, because
very much so.
That's a lot of lost income that the family was going to depend on. So you've got to kind of try to replace that. Yeah.
I completely agree. Well, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of The Loyal Lawyer within our series Accident Claims Central, where we discussed the hard and the painful topic of wrongful deaths. We will be filming many more podcast episodes soon, so we hope you will join us again.